Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Madeline and today I'll be showing you how to make this double brim hat. So what exactly a double brim hat is it's where you have a bottom portion where it's 2 layers of knit fabric and then you have a top portion where it's a single layer. So it kind of creates like an ear warmer and a hat combined because this double layer down here is really warm. So for this tutorial, I'm going to do videos of each step along the way. So down in the description box, you're going to find the full written pattern, so it'll be a link to that. Then I'll also provide links to all the materials that I used to make my version of the hat. And also I'll provide all the video time breakpoints for each step. So for example, casting on will be 1 step, and I'll say what exactly the time was that happened in the video. So therefore, if there's a certain step you're looking for, you can go back, fast forward, rewind, and watch certain steps if you're only looking for those. Or if you want to watch a step again, you know exactly where to go to. So I hope everyone finds all those helpful. The only things you need to know beforehand to knit this hat are knit and purl, and the rest I'll teach you along the way. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Feel free to leave any comments or questions you have down in the comments down below, and I'll be happy to help you out. And I hope you enjoy, so let's get started. We're going to need a couple different needle sizes to complete this project. So first, when we're casting on, we're going to be using a 16-inch circular needle. And the size I have here is the size US 9. So just the full title of it would be a US 9 16-inch circular knitting needle. Then, once we get up to the main fabric of the hat and we complete the ribbing, we're going to want to switch to a larger needle size. So here, we're going to use a US 10.5. And the way my needles work is that they're interchangeable. But again, you're going to want a US 10.5 16-inch circular knitting needle. And then finally, for the crown decreases, we're going to want some double-pointed needles. So here, I'm going to use a US 10.5 set of double-pointed needles. Those are all the knitting needles we'll need for this project. Now for the more miscellaneous categories here, you're going to need a pair of scissors to break your yarn. You'll need a tapestry needle to weave in your ends, and also for when we're sewing the brim inside the hat. And then finally, we're going to need some stitch markers. So I have about 10 total here, and they are all the removable stitch marker type, which just means, if I focus that real quick, it just means that you can open them, put them on your knitting, and then take them off again if you want to. So I have about 10 total, and then you always want to make sure that you have one that's different than the rest of them, and that's just so you can tell where your beginning of the round is. So here I'm just using one metal one and the rest are plastic. If you don't have one that's different than the rest, you can also just take some scrap yarn you have and tie it in a little loop and wrap it around your knitting needle, so that works just as well as that. And then the final thing we'll need is, of course, the yarn. The yarn I'll be using in this tutorial is from Echoview Fiber Mill, and I just want to thank them for providing the yarn for this tutorial. So I was actually inspired to make this hat when I saw this yarn at my local yarn shop. So Echoview Fiber Mill is a really cool company. So they're based in North Carolina, and they're part of a fully operational farm. And the really interesting thing is that they focus on a lot of different sustainable aspects. So for example, 50% of their energy, their operational energy, comes from solar panels. And they're also a living wage certified company. So they just stand for a lot of really amazing things. And this yarn in particular, I feel like really embodies their vision. So what this is it's 90% American merino wool, and then it's 10% recycled yarn and sweaters. So you can see it's just kind of this really nice gray color, and then there's little specks of different colors throughout it. So it makes for this really beautiful yarn. It's also incredibly soft. So this is the slate gray color, which I'm going to be using for the brim of my hat. And then this is the creamy white colorway that I'll be using for the top of my hat. So again, you can see the little specks of color show up beautifully on the white as well. So this is going to be the yarn I use for my tutorial. And of course, I'll leave the link to where you can purchase this yarn and more about this fiber mill down below in the description box. The first step I'm going to demonstrate is casting on. So the materials I have in front of me are, first I have my smaller 16-inch circular needle. This is my US 9. And then I also have the color yarn that I'm going to be using for the brim of my hat. And the way I've divided this yarn up here is I just have this main ball of yarn, which is called the working yarn. And then I have yarn over here that I've taken off, and this is going to be the tail of my yarn. So I actually have about 2 yards over here, which may seem like a lot, but we're actually going to be using this for 2 things. So first, I'm going to be using this to cast on. And then at the end of the hat, I'm going to be using the leftover tail that we have to actually sew the brim inside the hat, creating that double brim feature. The first step in the long tail cast on process is creating a slip knot. There's a lot of different ways you can create slip knots, so I'll just show you the way I do it. So first, I lay the yarn over my left hand. So I have the working yarn coming out the top and the tail coming out the bottom. I just grab that string with my 3 bottom fingers there. And now I'm going to wrap it up and over my finger 2 times. And now you can kind of just hold that other piece of string with the other fingers. It doesn't really matter where you have those at this point. I'm going to take the second loop, bring it over the first loop, take the new second loop, bring it over the first loop again, and now I'm going to want to slide this off of my finger while holding onto this new second loop. Now that I've done that, I have a slip knot. So I'm going to want to put this on my needle. So when you slide on your needle, I have the tail in front and the working yarn in the back, and you can just pull on the tail and it'll tighten right onto your needle. Now that I have my slip knot on the needle, and this does count as my first stitch, I'm going to need to cast on the rest of my stitches. So the method I'm going to be using is called the long tail cast on. And the way this works is as follows. You want to grab the strands of yarn, both strands that are coming off the needle, with your 3 bottom fingers there. And then you can see the 2 strands, you can kind of create a little hole in between those. So using your pointer finger and your thumb, you want to create a diamond shape with those. So your index finger is pushing back the working yarn, and your thumb is pushing towards yourself the tail. I also recommend you use your pointer finger of your other hand to hold the slip knot in place, just so that it doesn't really slide anywhere or slide off the needle as you're doing this cast on method. Now that you've created the diamond shape, you want to tilt your palm up towards the sky. And now we're going to move our needle to create the long tail cast on. So the first part is you're going to go under the loops that are on your thumb and up in between the 2. Then you're going to move your needle back towards your index finger and wrap it around from the back, the stitch that's wrapped around that finger. And finally we're going to go through that loop again that's on the thumb. Let it off your fingers and then just pull the tail a little bit to tighten. So now I reset up my fingers. I tilt my hand up again. I go towards myself and then under the thumb, in between the 2 stitches that are wrapped, or kind of like the loop that's wrapped around my thumb. I go back towards my pointer finger, wrap the needle up and over that strand, and then take the needle back through that loop that's on my thumb. And again, I pull tight. So we have 3 stitches cast on now. So I'm going to keep on doing this until I have a total of 80 stitches on my needle. Another thing to note too is you want to pull them a little bit snug, but you don't want to pull them all the way tight. And this is just to make sure we have plenty of stretch when we're finishing the hat and seaming it inside, right? Because this is the cast on edge, so you want to make sure this stretches just as much as our ribbing does. It also doesn't matter that all these little lumps along the bottom are perfectly even. If you have a couple that are a little bit larger, that's all right, because again, this will all appear on the inside of the hat. I've now finished casting on my 80 stitches, and I made sure to count them a couple times just to make sure I have the right number. And then the other thing I've done is I just tied up the rest of my tail that I didn't use, just so that while I'm knitting, I make sure to not knit with my tail. So now we're going to join in the round. And we're going to hold the needle that has the working yarn coming out with it in our right hand, and hold the needle that doesn't have the working yarn coming out with it in our left hand. And when you do this, you're just going to want to make sure basically that there aren't any twists going around the needle. So for me, I'm just going to make sure that all these bumps are facing down. Now that I've done that, I'm going to use the marker that I've chosen for my beginning of the round, and I'm going to place it on the needle with the working yarn coming out of it. And now I'm going to begin my ribbing. So I just take that right needle and put it right into the first stitch on the left needle as if I'm going to knit. Now I'm going to do knit 2, bring the yarn to the front, and purl 2. And I'm going to continue doing knit 2, purl 2 until I reach the stitch marker again. I just returned back over to the stitch marker. So the stitch marker is the next thing that I would basically knit into. And I finished with 2 purl stitches. So if you had the right number of stitches on your needle, it should have been divisible by 4, and you should have finished with 2 purl stitches. So now I'm just going to pass the stitch marker from one needle to the other, bring my yarn to the back again, and beginning doing the knit 2, purl 2 ribbing again. So anytime you see a knit stitch, which are these stitches that don't have the bumps in front, you're going to want to knit right into those. And then when you see a purl stitch, which are the ones with the bumps in the front, you're going to want to purl directly into those. So again, we're just going to continue doing rounds of this knit 2, purl 2 ribbing until the hat measures 4.5 inches. So the way you'll measure that is you just go from the bottom of this cast on edge up until about, I usually actually do it until the bottom of the needle. So you're going to want to make sure you have 4.5 inches in between there. The next step is going to be to increase our needle size and to switch our yarn color. So the materials I'll need here are, I need my larger needle. So this one is my 16-inch US size 10.5 circular needle. I have my new yarn color, and then I'm also going to need my scissors to break this previous color I was using. So I'm just going to leave maybe like a 10-inch tail or so, just so that later on I can weave that in. Move that color to the side. And now I'm going to take my new needle and go right into that first stitch, the next one that you would have knit with the previous color, as if you're going to knit it. Take your yarn, wrap it right over there, and then knit through that first stitch. And now you continue knitting all the way around the round with this new color onto this new knitting needle. And now once you get to the end of that round, you'll see the other needle will just fall out. So this was our smaller needle over here. Put that to the side. And now we're only knitting on our larger needle size. So I'm going to re-add my beginning of the round stitch marker. And now I'll continue to knit round after round until my hat measures 5.5 inches from where we started this new white color. I've now finished knitting for about 5.5 inches, so I'm going to begin my decreases. For this part of the pattern, you're going to want to have 2 things handy. First, you're going to want to have your stitch markers to mark the decreases, and then also you're going to want to have your double pointed needles. So the first step in these decreases is to place a stitch marker every 8 stitches. So this is my beginning of the marker round, so I'm going to knit 8. Then place a stitch marker. And continue doing this all the way around until you get back to your beginning of the round marker. I just finished placing all of my stitch markers. So now I'm going to start doing the actual decreases. And what this is it's alternating between two rows. The first row is a decrease round, where we decrease before each stitch marker, and then after we do one round of decreases, we just knit all the way around one round. So for the decrease rounds, you're going to knit until 2 stitches before your stitch marker. You're going to do a knit 2 together. So you insert the needle as if you're going to knit, but go through both stitches. Wrap your yarn around the same way as a knit stitch, and then pull it through. So we just decreased 1 stitch. Now I'm going to pass my stitch marker, knit until 2 stitches before the next stitch marker, and then do another knit 2 together. I'm going to continue doing this decrease stitch right before each stitch marker all the way around until I get back to my beginning of the marker. And now right before the beginning of the round marker is going to be my final decrease. So I do a knit 2 together and then pass that marker. So now the second round is going to be the round where we just knit all the way. So just continue knitting all the way around the round. I just finished my knit round. So now I'm going to continue alternating between that decrease round and the knit round until 40 stitches remain. So for me that'll be 4 stitches in between each set of stitch markers. And be sure to switch to the double pointed needles when you're ready. I have been decreasing and I'm now ready to switch to my double pointed needles. The way I can tell is that essentially the yarn doesn't slide along the needle as well as it did before. So you can see there's pretty big gaps in between my stitches now. The point that I went to before I'm about to switch is that I have 4 stitches in between each stitch marker and I just completed my knit round. The way you switch to the double pointed needles is I only use 3 and then I knit with the 4th. So there's 1 extra. I'm at the beginning of the round right now. My beginning of the round stitch marker fell off. But what I'm going to do is I know I have 40 stitches total, so I'm going to want to basically almost evenly distribute them between the 3. So I'm just going to start sliding the stitches purlwise. So just go into each stitch from right to left and just slide it onto your double pointed needle. Also make sure you're sliding your stitch markers on in the order that they are. So on that first one I put 13. Now I'm going to pick up another double pointed needle and I'm going to start sliding onto that one. On that one I'm going to put 14. I'm going to turn again and then I'm just going to put these remaining stitches on my last double pointed needle. We've completely taken the stitches off of our circular needle, so I'm just going to put that to the side. And you'll notice too that you can no longer have the beginning of the round marker, because that would be right where these 2 needles combine. So the way I just remind myself that this was my beginning of the round is I'll just take one of my removable stitch markers and just hook it in right down here. So that way every time I get over here, I know that is the beginning of the round. One other thing that you're going to encounter while you're decreasing is that you may need to shift stitches between needles. So let's say I needed to knit 2 together before the next stitch marker over here. So I would do knit 2 and then I would need to knit these 2 together. What you'd want to do is you just want to slide both of them up towards the tip of the needle, so they're closest to each other, and then just pass one from one needle to the other. So now you can knit those two together on that needle. So that is how you switch to double pointed needles. To knit on double pointed needles, you pick up your fourth needle. This is my beginning of the round right here. I'm gonna slide these a little closer to the front of that needle. And now you just go in knitwise, wrap your yarn around, and then just knit as you usually would. Once you reach the end of this needle, you'll notice that then all the stitches are on this needle, and you can now begin knitting with this one. So to show you that, so now this is my last stitch, so I'm just going to knit that one normal, and then this needle slides out, all the stitches are on this one. I'm going to reorganize it to the center, turn my work, and now I'm going to begin knitting with this needle. So that is how you knit on double pointed needles. I just finished decreasing down to my 40 stitches, so that was where I was alternating between decrease rounds and knit rounds. And I just finished with the final knit round. So now I'm gonna do 2 decrease rounds in a row. So I'm gonna decrease one whole round, then decrease right again after it. Once you finish those 2, you should have 2 stitches in between each set of stitch markers. I've now finished those 2 decrease rounds in a row. So on this final decrease round, I'm gonna knit 2 together, and those are the only 2 stitches remaining in between each stitch marker. And after I do each knit 2 together, I'm gonna remove that stitch marker. Once I finish this round, there'll just be 10 stitches left. I've finished decreasing, and the next step is to break your yarn and weave it through these remaining stitches. I'm gonna cut my yarn, leaving about a 10-inch tail. Thread it through my tapestry needle. And you can see my yarn comes out of this stitch right here. The next stitch I'm going to weave it into is going to be the next stitch I would knit into. And I'm going to go along the inside of each of these stitches and thread the yarn through them. Sometimes it's easy to slide it through a couple at once, sometimes it's easier to do one at a time. I've gone through them all once, so I'm going to go through them again a second time. The second time is completely optional, I just like to do that to make it extra secure. Now that you've threaded the yarn through those stitches, you can pull out the double pointed needles, and you're going to want to pull this yarn tight to secure it. You have 2 options with what you can do with this. You can thread it through the inside and weave it in, or you can also just tie a little knot with it first and then use it to tie on your pom-pom. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use this one to tie on my pom-pom. So I'm just going to leave it up here as it is. We've now finished all the knitting that we need to do. So now what we need to do is we need to create that double brim feature. For this part, you're going to just need some of your removable stitch markers, a tapestry needle, and then a pair of scissors. To start, put your hat inside out. I'm going to untie my tail. The trickiest part here is making sure that this rib part lines up. So basically you can see that on this side it looks like a knit stitch, and on this side that same line looks like a purl stitch. So I'm just going to pick somewhere around the round and just fold one of the sections directly in half. Right up until you can see the last gray stitch is right where my cast on edge is. I'm going to use one of these removable stitch markers to basically pin that in place. Now I'm going to move a little bit further down, pick another section. So here's another knit section. On the other side we have the purl. So I'm just going to go up again, fold it in half, pin that in place. We can continue doing this all the way around the hat. And what this will do is it'll just keep it from becoming diagonal as we're seaming it together, and it'll just make everything perfectly aligned and make it easier to seam. I've now secured it in place all the way around. So I'm going to thread my tapestry needle with that extra long tail we started off with. Starting at the beginning of my round, I have my tapestry needle threaded. I'm going to make sure that's lined up. So you can see it looks like my tail comes out of some purl stitches. So on the other side, those are knit stitches. So I'm going to want to weave or start seaming in right here. Also make sure if you haven't woven in your tails yet that you don't get them trapped down in here and that they're up here so later on we can take care of those. How I like to do it is you can see there's this gray stitch that goes down underneath this white one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that, come out, and then go through the border of our cast on edge. And that'll be my first one. Then you can see the next gray stitch goes down into another white stitch. I'm going to go through that one and then pick up again both of those edge stitches on the cast on edge. Repeat again. And I just continue doing this all the way around the round. And if you ever get off, that's what we put in those, like, basically placeholders for. So you can make sure that if you ever get off a little bit, you can realign yourself every time you get over here. So if you need to skip one on this edge or skip one on that edge, you can do it that way. You also don't need to pull them very tight at all. So you want to make sure that if you stretch the hat, that they still stretch. I finished seaming all the way along the bottom. You can see the hat is still nice and stretchy. It'll also be really warm along that edge. Now I'm just going to give my hat a quick wash, add a pom-pom, and then I'll be back to show you the finished thing. Here is my finished hat after I washed it and also added a pom-pom. The way I wash my hats is I just get them in a bucket of cold water and I add a little bit of wool wash, let them soak in there for about 15 minutes. I take them out and I roll them up in a towel, so gently just roll them up, no, don't wring them or anything like that. And then I lay it flat to dry. So once I did that, everything evened out entirely. So you can see along this inner edge, that seam I have, it's almost invisible. It looks kind of just like another row that I knit along in there. So I think that turned out really, really nice. And then for my pom-pom, I used the same color as my brim down at the bottom. And I used a clover pom-pom maker in the largest size. So this one's the one up top and it's 3 3/8 inches. In case you're looking for a similar size to the one I have. I hope everyone enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down below. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.